Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Rose and Rubini podcast, Making Sense of This World. My name is Manas Chavla, and as always, I'm really pleased to be joined by CEO and Head of Research, Brunella Rosa. This week, we're talking about the result of the papal conclave, sort of a widely awaited event for the last couple of weeks. Brunello, I have to say, when I saw on my phone the headline that an American Pope had been chosen, I had to do a bit of a double take because of Donald Trump's comments just a couple of days prior that he wanted to be Pope. Thankfully, that's not what we have in the Vatican. We have the first American Pope, Leo the 14th, is the name that he's chosen, otherwise Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost. Renato, tell me a little bit more about sort of how the papal conclave happens and how politics and the papacy have always been intertwined.
Yes, absolutely. This is not a new story. The papacy and politics has always been intertwined since the time of the Romans, and in the column I discussed the various steps from year 311 in history. In 330, year 330, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And then um, moving forward by um, a few years, even the first Leo the Great, San Leone Magno, Leo the Great, was the one that actually stopped Attila the Hun and spared Rome in 452. So it's the beginning of history, effectively, that the Christian church and politics have been intertwined. And during the Middle Age, this was even more so. The controversy of investitures was another peak time. And an interesting bit about that is the fact that this has resurfaced recently with the agreement that Cardinal Parolin, who was actually the front runner for this election, made with the Chinese government on the investiture of the bishops in China. So something that seemed, buried in the very distant past is still very much active and acting and having impact in today's elections. Just a couple of extra points. Martin Luther himself was an Augustinian, as this Pope is. In fact, this is the first Augustinian Pope in history, and we'll discuss later, I'm sure, why this may have an impact on the relationship with the other famous American today's at the world stage, which is Donald Trump, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I mean, moving to today, I mean, what are the political motivations behind the election of Robert Prevost? And what was his relationship like, or how similar will he be to Pope Francis?
So, um, the church has been severely divided for years now. In reality, of course, there have been much bigger divisions in the past that led to schisma, more than one, in fact. The most recent is the one by Henry VIII that created the Church of England, of course. Um, but even without getting to that level of divisions, there are still different lines of thought within the Catholic Church. Certainly, the American base, the Catholic Church, which is one of the richest thanks to the donation, um, is the one that is putting more pressure on the papacy, and they would like to follow a much more conservative approach compared to the reforms that have been initiated by Pope Francis and are likely to be continued in some form by Leo the 14th. Leo the 14th, therefore, being American, could be the one that can bridge potentially this gap, and also the gap with the other parts of America. And it's not just North America, also South America matters a lot, because there is where the liberation theology initiated, which is a sort of neo-Franciscan approach of a church being closer to the poor and the destitute and so on. And this was initiated, in fact, by Father Gustavo Gutierrez in Peru, where this Pope spent most of his recent career before moving to Rome in the Curia Romana. So, Pope Francis saw in Prevost the possibility of bridging some of these gaps between North and South America, between North America and continental Europe, and to some extent allowing the church to move on in a much more united fashion.
Yeah. And why did he choose the name Leo 14th?
This is very interesting. Um, the choice of a name is always, how can I say, a programmatic explanation of what they intend to do. Francis was the first pope named after the saint of the poor, and he was very much in favor of a poor church at the service of poor people. And so, in choosing that name, actually for the first time in history, he made that very well clear. So, why did Prevost chose this name? Well, you have to return to the predecessors, and the most immediate, apart from Leo the Great, the one that stopped Attila, and now somebody can make a comparison whether the modern day Attila is Trump, is the one that issued one of the most famous encyclics called Rerum Novarum, which means the encyclic of the new things. And what were the new things? This was the end of the 19th century at the time of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution created a new type of challenges for the church, not just because new types of poverty emerged, the one deriving from labor in factory, but also a reaction to this poverty with the birth and growth of socialist movements, which, as we know, have had also a sort of atheistic approach. So, to some extent, the mass of laborers were attracted by both the socialist views and also a less church-prone approach. So Leo the 13th thought, well, this is time for the church to renovate, hence the encyclical of the new things, Rerum Novarum, and say we really need to get closer to these people that are facing this challenge. So what is the challenge today? As we had the Industrial Revolution at the time, now we are having the digital revolution, which is exactly able to create the same time of discontent among laborers. Most of them will lose their jobs because of robotics and automation, and they will probably seek refuge in all sorts of different dimensions where there could be drugs, where there could be other forms of movements. So the church needs to be close to these people, Leo the 14th believes, and that's the reason why he cannot choose that name.
That makes sense. And I mean, looking towards the Pope's relationship with, the United States, which will be influential, how do you think he's being perceived in the US, particularly by the MAGA movement? I mean, are they happy to have the first American Pope? Are there some political differences there?
Should be happy, but they are not. And they are not because they see way too close to Pope Francis and his, let's call it, progressive approach. Is far from some of the candidates they had, either Burke or Sarah. These were the candidates that they were punting on that didn't materialize. They didn't have enough consensus. After all, the Pope chose his own successor by appointing the cardinals that will elect him. And this was super majority for the people chosen by Francis and let's put it this way, appointed by Francis, but to a large extent chosen by Prevost himself, which was made by Francis, the head of the, let's call it, ministry in charge of the selection of the cardinals that eventually vote for the new pope. So it's kind of a transition that has been studied for some time by by Pope Francis. But it's not just the fact that is way more progressive than MAGA would like. I think there are a series of reasons why they are likely to clash at some point. First of all, the position on immigration. This is a pope that has worked in some of the poorest areas of the world, the archdioceses in Peru, for example, being one, while as we know, the entire mantra of the US administration is anti-immigrant, especially those coming from Latin America. It has already had a chance to fight on the platforms that are available today, such as X, with Vice President J.D. Vance, who calls himself a baby Catholic, has he recently converted. The second reason is on technology itself. If this is the Pope that wants to defend the discontents of technology and technological revolution, we know that the big promoters of that technological revolution either sit in the Oval Office, such as Elon Musk, or are very close to the Oval Office, such as Peter Thiel, who's the big sponsor of J.D. Vance, as we said already, or are supporting very closely this administration we saw during the Trump's inauguration. Another important reason is because this Pope has really made initially, from the very beginning, a pro-Ukraine approach. He called Zelensky the day after the election. It showed that he's closer to Ukraine than even his own predecessor was. Pope Francis was a bit more balanced. He just wanted to see the end of the war, even if that meant make concessions to Putin, and he wasn't afraid of saying, this Pope Leo XIV, that of course is Russia that initiated the war in Ukraine, something that this administration finds it very hard. And then let me finish with what I think is going to be one of the most contentious points, and this is the reason why I said before there would be a clash between Trump and his administration and the Pope, and is the role of science. The Augustinians have as their motto Caritas and Scienza, which means love and science. Some of the most prominent scientists in history were Augustinians among themselves. Is really worth reminding Gregor Mendel, the inventor of genetics, and not just one. Sigmund Freud invented psychoanalysis, as you know, but the real predecessor of psychoanalysis has been considered by several studies. Augustine himself, with his masterpiece, The Confession, because Augustine, before becoming one of the fathers of the church, in fact, was a very active young man that tried all sorts of, let's say, adventures in life, including of sexual and other nature. And so he felt the need of explore the depth of his soul to kind of redeem himself. And those confessions are somehow considered the predecessor of psychoanalysis, which is again, and psychotherapy and so on, which is yet another science that can collide with Trump. Not to forget that this Pope is also a graduate in mathematics. And this is important. This is a Pope that believes in number, not just in God, at the time in which many Trump supporters don't believe in numbers, as they say themselves. Not only that, as we said in the past, they seem to be immune to facts, to evidence, brought before them, very much as it happened in a cult. So this Pope is saying you shouldn't follow cults in which you just make your brain, put your brain to sleep. You should follow the real church, a real religion that encourages to love everybody and to think for yourself and use your brain, not just forget about it. So I can see how this can develop in coming years as the two big American figures will carry on with their activities.
Absolutely. There'll be plenty of chances, given how long the papacy is, for a potential sort of collision course to take place between these two very different ideologies. As always, Bernal, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you very much. Until next time.